We've all witnessed it. The friend who finds endless evidence supporting their political beliefs while dismissing contradictory facts as propaganda. The investor who only notices information validating their financial decisions while ignoring warning signs. The person convinced of a conspiracy theory who interprets every piece of news as proof of their worldview. What drives this selective perception? Why do we filter reality through the lens of our existing beliefs? The answer lies in one of the most pervasive and powerful cognitive biases identified by psychological research: confirmation bias. This phenomenon explains why we unconsciously seek out, interpret, and remember information that confirms what we already believe, while systematically ignoring or discounting evidence that challenges our views. The psychologist Raymond Nickerson put it, confirmation bias is perhaps the best known and most widely accepted notion of inferential error to come out of the literature on human reasoning. Today we'll explore this fundamental flaw in human thinking that affects every decision we make, every opinion we form, and every conversation we have. We'll examine its origins, mechanisms, real-world consequences, and most importantly, how to recognize and counteract it in ourselves. Because the greatest danger of confirmation bias is that it operates invisibly, shaping our perception of reality, while we remain convinced we're seeing things objectively. The formal identification of confirmation bias began with a deceptively simple experiment in 1960. British psychologist Peter Wason designed what would become one of the most famous studies in cognitive psychology. He presented participants with a sequence of 3 numbers, 2, 4, 6, and asked them to discover the rule governing the sequence by generating their own number sets and receiving feedback on whether each set conformed to the rule. Most participants quickly formed a hypothesis. The rule must be numbers increasing by 2. They then tested sequences like 8, 10, 12 or 20, 22, 24, receiving confirmation each time. Satisfied with this evidence, they confidently announced their conclusion, but they were wrong. The actual rule was simply any ascending numbers. What fascinated Wason was not that participants guessed incorrectly, but how they tested their hypothesis. They overwhelmingly sought confirming evidence, sequences that fit their theory, rather than attempting to falsify it by trying sequences like 1, 2, 3, or 10, 20, 30. Had they sought disconfirming evidence, they would have discovered the broader rule. This experiment revealed a fundamental truth about human cognition. We're not natural scientists testing hypotheses objectively. Instead, we are lawyers building cases for conclusions we've already reached. As Wason observed, we seek to confirm, not to disconfirm, our favourite hypotheses. Following Wason's groundbreaking work, decades of research have confirmed that confirmation bias is not a quirk of laboratory conditions, but a pervasive feature of human reasoning that operates across virtually every domain of judgment and decision-making. At its core, confirmation bias operates through 3 distinct but interconnected mechanisms, each working to shield our existing beliefs from contradictory information. First is selective exposure, the tendency to seek out information that aligns with our existing views while avoiding information that challenges them. In the modern information landscape, we choose news sources that reflect our political leanings, follow social media accounts that echo our opinions, and befriend people who share our worldview. This self-constructed information bubble feels neutral because it seems we're simply consuming the truth, unaware that we've systematically filtered reality. Second is biased interpretation, the tendency to interpret ambiguous information in ways that support our pre-existing beliefs. The same economic data will be seen as proof of governmental success by supporters and evidence of failure by opponents. The same clinical trial results will be interpreted differently by those who believe in a treatment versus skeptics. As philosopher Francis Bacon noted in 1620, the human understanding, when it has once adopted an opinion, draws all things else to support and agree with it. Third is selective recall, the tendency to remember information that confirms our beliefs more readily than information that contradicts them. We forget the predictions that didn't come true, the warnings we ignored that proved correct, and the evidence that contradicted our favoured conclusions. Over time, our memory becomes a biased archive, preserving evidence for our worldview while quietly discarding contradictions. These three mechanisms work in concert, creating a self-reinforcing cycle. We seek confirming evidence, interpret ambiguous information favourably, and remember supporting facts while forgetting contradictions. The result is an increasingly entrenched belief system that feels entirely justified by overwhelming evidence we've unconsciously curated. As psychologist Daniel Kahneman observed, "We are not designed to seek the truth, we are designed to win arguments." This insight captures the evolutionary logic behind confirmation bias. In our ancestral environment, maintaining social cohesion and defending group beliefs often mattered more than discovering objective truth. Understanding how confirmation bias operates requires examining the life cycle of belief formation and maintenance. This journey reveals why some beliefs become so resistant to contradictory evidence that they're effectively immune to facts. It begins with the initial impression, a first encounter with an idea, claim, or person that creates a preliminary judgment. This initial impression, often formed rapidly and on limited information, becomes the foundation upon which everything else is built. Research shows that first impressions are remarkably persistent, colouring all subsequent information processing. Once formed, we enter the confirmation phase, actively seeking evidence that validates our initial impression. A person who forms a positive first impression of a new colleague will notice their contributions in meetings, remember their insightful comments, and interpret ambiguous behaviours charitably. Someone who forms a negative first impression of the same person will notice their mistakes, remember their failures, and interpret identical behaviours critically. As supporting evidence accumulates, not because it's more abundant, but because we're selectively gathering it, we reach the certainty phase. Now fully convinced our belief is correct, we become resistant to contradictory evidence. Challenges to our belief are met with dismissal, rationalization, or outright rejection. As writer Anais Nin eloquently stated, "We don't see things as they are, we see them as we are." The most entrenched beliefs enter what researchers call the identity phase, where the belief becomes intertwined with our sense of self. Political affiliations, religious convictions, and core worldviews reach this stage. At this point, contradictory evidence doesn't just challenge a belief, it threatens identity itself. This explains why facts often fail to change minds on deeply held convictions, and why presenting contrary evidence can paradoxically strengthen rather than weaken belief. Those who progress to genuine expertise eventually reach what might be called the flexible phase, where accumulated knowledge includes awareness of contradictory evidence, anomalies, and the limitations of current understanding. True experts hold their beliefs with appropriate tentativeness, understanding that certainty is often inversely related to understanding. As philosopher Bertrand Russell wisely noted, "The fundamental cause of trouble in the modern world is that the stupid are cocksure while the intelligent are full of doubt." This observation captures how confirmation bias operates differently at different levels of knowledge and expertise. While laboratory demonstrations of confirmation bias are compelling, its real power becomes apparent when we examine its effects across society, shaping outcomes in domains from personal relationships to global conflicts. In medicine, confirmation bias can lead to diagnostic errors with fatal consequences. A physician who forms an initial diagnostic impression may unconsciously focus on symptoms that support that diagnosis while overlooking contradictory indicators. One study found that doctors who reached a diagnosis within the first 5 minutes of examining a patient rarely revised that diagnosis, even when subsequent information suggested alternatives. The medical axiom, when you hear hoofbeats, think horses not zebras, is meant to encourage parsimony, but can reinforce confirmation bias, causing doctors to miss rare but serious conditions. In criminal justice, confirmation bias has contributed to wrongful convictions. Once investigators identify a suspect, they often unconsciously interpret evidence in ways that support guilt while overlooking exculpatory information. Witness statements are recorded in ways that emphasize incriminating details. Forensic evidence is interpreted to support the prosecution's theory. DNA exoneration cases have revealed numerous instances where tunnel vision, the criminal justice term for confirmation bias, led to conviction of innocent individuals while the actual perpetrator remained free. In business and investing, confirmation bias explains why smart, experienced professionals repeatedly make catastrophic decisions. Investors who believe in a company seek out bullish analyses while dismissing bearish warnings. Corporate leaders who commit to a strategic direction interpret market signals as validation while dismissing contradictory data as temporary noise. The result is persistence in failing strategies long past the point where objective analysis would recommend change. In relationships, confirmation bias shapes how we perceive partners, friends, and family members. Those in the honeymoon phase of relationships notice only positive qualities while explaining away red flags. Those in deteriorating relationships notice only faults while forgetting or minimizing positive attributes. The same behavior, arriving 10 minutes late, will be interpreted as fashionably late for someone we like and disrespectfully inconsiderate for someone we've soured on. As historian Barbara Tuchman observed, wooden-headedness, the source of self-deception, is a factor that plays a remarkably large role in government. It consists in assessing a situation in terms of preconceived fixed notions while ignoring or rejecting any contrary signs. This governmental wooden-headedness, driven by confirmation bias, has contributed to policy failures throughout history, from military blunders to economic crises to public health disasters. The manifestation of confirmation bias isn't uniform across cultures. Research reveals that cultural factors significantly influence both the prevalence and expression of this cognitive tendency, suggesting that while the underlying mechanism is universal, its strength and character are culturally malleable. Western, particularly American culture, with its emphasis on individualism and personal conviction, may actually amplify confirmation bias. The cultural value placed on standing by your principles and knowing what you believe can make changing one's mind in response to evidence seem like weakness rather than wisdom. The American pioneer spirit celebrates stubborn persistence in one's chosen path, a quality that becomes problematic when the path is demonstrably wrong. Eastern cultures with greater emphasis on social harmony and consensus may exhibit confirmation bias differently. While individuals in collectivist societies still show the bias, they may be more responsive to group consensus and social feedback. Research has found that East Asian participants show greater willingness to revise beliefs in response to group feedback compared to Western participants, suggesting that cultural values can modulate the strength of individual confirmation bias. Indigenous epistemologies often incorporate mechanisms for counteracting confirmation bias through emphasis on multiple perspectives and long-term thinking. Many indigenous decision-making traditions explicitly seek diverse viewpoints and consider implications across generations, creating cultural practices that guard against the tunnel vision of confirmation bias. Religious traditions vary in how they handle confirmation bias. Some emphasize faith and certainty as virtues, potentially strengthening confirmation bias around religious doctrines. Others, particularly contemplative traditions, cultivate what Buddhists call beginner's mind, an approach to experience that questions assumptions and remains open to evidence. As the Zen saying goes, in the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few. However, no culture has eliminated confirmation bias. The fundamental cognitive architecture that produces it, the need for cognitive efficiency, the comfort of certainty, the pain of admitting error, transcends cultural boundaries. What varies is how explicitly cultures acknowledge the bias and what practices they develop to counteract it. A counterintuitive finding in confirmation bias research challenges our assumptions about intelligence and objectivity. Increased knowledge and cognitive sophistication don't necessarily reduce bias. In some domains, they amplify it. This phenomenon, which researchers call sophisticated bias, occurs because intelligence and knowledge provide better tools for defending existing beliefs. A highly intelligent person who holds a false belief can construct more elaborate, coherent rationalizations than someone less intellectually gifted. They can find more creative ways to dismiss contradictory evidence, generate more sophisticated justifications, and identify more subtle flaws in opposing arguments. Research on politically motivated reasoning demonstrates this clearly. Studies show that people with higher levels of scientific literacy and quantitative reasoning skills are often more polarized on politicized scientific issues like climate change and nuclear power. Rather than enabling more objective evaluation of evidence, increased knowledge provides ammunition for defending predetermined conclusions. This doesn't mean knowledge is useless or that education increases bias. Rather, it reveals that knowledge alone is insufficient to overcome confirmation bias. What's needed alongside knowledge is metacognitive awareness, thinking about how we think, and deliberate practices designed to counteract our natural tendencies. Expertise, when properly developed, does include these metacognitive elements. True experts in a field develop what psychologist Philip Tetlock calls fox-like thinking, entertaining multiple hypotheses, actively seeking disconfirming evidence, and updating beliefs based on outcomes. This stands in contrast to hedgehog thinking, explaining everything through a single overarching theory defended against all challenges. As Nobel laureate physicist Richard Feynman advised, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. This warning is particularly important for intelligent, knowledgeable individuals who possess the tools to fool themselves more effectively than others. The challenge, then, is not simply to acquire more knowledge, but to develop epistemological humility, recognition that our cognitive processes are systematically biased, and that overcoming these biases requires active, deliberate effort. Perhaps the most challenging aspect of confirmation bias is recognizing it in ourselves. By definition, the bias operates below conscious awareness, making our biased perceptions feel like objective observations. However, research has identified several practical strategies that can help us counteract this pervasive tendency. The most powerful technique is actively seeking disconfirming evidence, deliberately looking for information that challenges your beliefs. This requires consciously asking, what would convince me I'm wrong? And what evidence would contradict my current view? Scientists formalize this approach through falsification, attempting to disprove rather than prove hypotheses. Applying this principle to everyday reasoning means approaching beliefs as hypotheses to be tested rather than truths to be defended. Consider the opposite is another valuable practice. Before finalizing a decision or opinion, explicitly generate arguments for the opposing view. Research shows that even 5 minutes of devil's advocate thinking can significantly reduce confirmation bias. This works because it forces attention to information and interpretations that would otherwise be ignored or dismissed. Pre-mortem analysis offers a specific application of considering the opposite. Before implementing a decision, imagine it has failed spectacularly and work backward to explain why. This technique, developed by psychologist Gary Klein, helps identify potential problems that confirmation bias might otherwise obscure. By assuming failure, you give yourself permission to acknowledge doubts and risks that optimism and commitment might suppress. Seeking out diverse perspectives provides external correctives to internal bias. This means not just consuming diverse information sources, but actively engaging with people who hold different views and taking their perspectives seriously. However, this strategy only works if approached with genuine openness. Exposing yourself to opposing views merely to practice refuting them can actually strengthen confirmation bias. Quantifying uncertainty helps counteract the false certainty that confirmation bias produces. Rather than thinking in terms of true or false, right or wrong, estimate probabilities. How confident are you in this belief? What percentage likelihood would you assign? This practice forces acknowledgement of uncertainty and makes it easier to update beliefs as new information emerges. Maintaining an evidence log for important beliefs creates accountability for your reasoning process. Document evidence for and against significant beliefs, including evidence you initially found persuasive but later dismissed. This creates a record that makes confirmation bias visible when you review it. Often, you'll notice that dismissed evidence was substantial and that your reasons for dismissing it were weak. As scientist Carl Sagan wisely counselled, the truth may be puzzling. It may take some work to grapple with. It may be counterintuitive, but there is a much greater chance that it will be true than if we simply make up an explanation that fits our own biases and preconceptions. This intellectual work, the deliberate effort to overcome our natural biases, is the price of clearer thinking. The digital revolution has fundamentally transformed how we access and process information, creating an environment where confirmation bias can operate with unprecedented scope and speed. Understanding these new dynamics is essential for navigating the modern information landscape. Social media platforms, despite their promise of connecting us to diverse perspectives, have instead become engines of confirmation bias. Algorithmic curation learns what content you engage with and serves more of the same, creating filter bubbles that insulate users from challenging viewpoints. The recommended for you and people also watched features guide us down paths of ideological reinforcement, presenting what feels like serendipitous discovery but is actually sophisticated bias amplification. The structure of online discourse further amplifies confirmation bias. The immediacy of social media rewards quick, confident assertions over careful, tentative analysis. Nuance gets lost. Complexity is punished by algorithms that favour engagement over accuracy. The result is an information ecosystem that selects for the very qualities: confidence, simplicity, emotional resonance, that confirmation bias already predisposes us toward. Echo chambers emerge naturally from these dynamics. As we curate our information sources, block disagreeable voices, and join communities of like-minded individuals, we construct digital environments where our beliefs face no serious challenge. Within these chambers, beliefs radicalize through what researchers call group polarization, the tendency for deliberation among like-minded people to drive opinion toward extremes. The sheer volume of available information paradoxically worsens confirmation bias rather than alleviating it. With millions of articles, studies, and opinions available on any topic, it's always possible to find something supporting any belief, no matter how fringe. This creates the illusion that beliefs are evidence-based, while actually they're based on cherry-picked evidence. Misinformation spreads through these biased information networks with frightening efficiency. False information that aligns with existing beliefs gets shared widely and accepted uncritically, while accurate information that challenges beliefs is scrutinized skeptically and dismissed. Research shows that fact-checking often fails to change minds and can even backfire, strengthening false beliefs through the continued attention to them. As media critic Clay Shirky notes, it's not information overload, it's filter failure. The filters we need are not just technological but cognitive, internal mechanisms for recognizing and counteracting our natural tendency toward confirmation. Without these cognitive filters, increased access to information becomes increased opportunity for self-deception. The solution isn't to abandon digital information sources, but to approach them with awareness of how they interact with our cognitive biases. This includes consciously diversifying information sources, recognizing when algorithmic curation is shaping what we see, and developing digital literacy skills that help distinguish between echo chamber reinforcement and genuine learning. While confirmation bias operates at the individual cognitive level, its cumulative effects shape society in profound and often troubling ways. Understanding these broader implications reveals confirmation bias as not merely a psychological curiosity, but a force that influences the trajectory of civilization. In democratic governance, confirmation bias undermines informed citizenship. When voters evaluate political information through the lens of partisan loyalty, policy debate devolves into team sport. Evidence becomes ammunition for predetermined positions rather than input for judgment. This creates a destructive cycle where political polarization increases confirmation bias, which in turn increases polarization. The result is democratic systems where citizens inhabit increasingly separate information realities, making compromise and collective problem-solving progressively more difficult. Scientific consensus faces unique challenges from confirmation bias in an era when complex technical issues require public understanding and support. Climate change, vaccination, and other scientifically settled questions remain politically controversial because confirmation bias allows ideological commitments to override expert consensus. As physicist Michael Faraday observed, "Nothing is too wonderful to be true if it be consistent with the laws of nature." But confirmation bias reverses this. Anything can seem false if it contradicts prior beliefs. In education, confirmation bias affects both teaching and learning. Teachers' expectations about student ability can create self-fulfilling prophecies, where students perform to the level of biased expectations. Students themselves exhibit confirmation bias in learning, remembering information that aligns with existing beliefs while forgetting contradictory facts. This creates significant challenges for education in controversial domains, where learning requires abandoning prior misconceptions. Economic markets, despite the assumption of rationality underlying classical economic theory, are profoundly shaped by confirmation bias. Asset bubbles form when investors collectively reinforce each other's optimistic interpretations, while dismissing warning signs. Corporate failures often trace to leadership teams that became convinced of their strategic brilliance and stopped seriously considering alternatives. As economist John Kenneth Galbraith Riley noted, "Faced with the choice between changing one's mind and proving that there is no need to do so, almost everyone gets busy on the proof. Interpersonal and intergroup conflict becomes intractable when confirmation bias causes each side to interpret the same events as evidence of the other's malevolence, while seeing their own actions as justified." In international conflicts, both sides genuinely believe they are defending themselves, while the other is the aggressor, each interpreting complex events through biased lenses that confirm their narrative. This mutual confirmation bias can transform manageable disputes into seemingly irresolvable conflicts. Addressing these societal challenges requires not just individual cognitive hygiene, but institutional reforms. This includes designing institutions that systematically counteract confirmation bias through practices like red team analysis, structured decision-making processes that require consideration of alternatives, and reward systems that value accuracy over confidence. Our journey through confirmation bias reveals a fundamental tension in human cognition. We are creatures who need beliefs to navigate complexity, yet the very mechanisms that let us maintain beliefs systematically distort our perception of reality. This tension cannot be eliminated. It's built into the architecture of human thought. But it can be managed through awareness and practice. Understanding confirmation bias offers a powerful tool for intellectual growth and better decision-making. It explains why smart people believe demonstrably false things, why facts often fail to change minds, and why we find ourselves in seemingly intractable disagreements with others who seem equally certain of opposite conclusions. This understanding should inspire humility about our own certainty and compassion for others' conviction. The awareness that we all see the world through distorting lenses of prior belief should make us more charitable in disagreement and more cautious in certainty. When someone disagrees with us, the explanation isn't necessarily stupidity, malevolence, or irrationality. It may be that they're operating from a different set of prior beliefs that shape how they interpret the same evidence we've seen. Perhaps most importantly, understanding confirmation bias highlights the value of intellectual virtue, the deliberate cultivation of thinking practices that counteract our natural biases. These include curiosity about opposing viewpoints, comfort with uncertainty and complexity, willingness to change one's mind in response to evidence, and the humility to acknowledge error. As we navigate an increasingly complex world, filled with competing narratives and partisan certainty, the ability to recognize and counteract confirmation bias becomes ever more essential. It helps us distinguish between beliefs we hold because they're supported by evidence and beliefs we hold because they're comfortable. It enables more productive discourse by helping us recognize when we're seeking truth versus seeking victory in argument. In the words of philosopher Karl Popper, true ignorance is not the absence of knowledge, but the refusal to acquire it. Confirmation bias represents a subtle form of this refusal, not conscious rejection of knowledge, but unconscious filtering that achieves the same result. By bringing this unconscious process into awareness and developing practices to counteract it, we open ourselves to genuine learning, more accurate understanding, and better decisions. The path forward requires accepting that certainty is often illusory, that our first impressions are frequently wrong, and that changing our minds in response to evidence is strength, not weakness. By embracing these uncomfortable truths, we take the first step toward clearer thinking and a more accurate understanding of the world as it actually is, rather than as we wish it to be.